I won't mirror it softly this time. There's no calm entry into what I'm about to say, no gradual unfolding meant to make it easier to absorb. Whatever this is, it doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't ask for permission to exist between two people who were never supposed to reach this level of clarity with each other. It just happens. And once it happens, there's no clean way to step back out of it. I've spent a long time learning how to exist in layers. Not because I enjoy distance, but because distance keeps things intact. It keeps people at a level where they can interact without disrupting anything real. Most never notice. They speak, they listen, they assume they understand, but they only ever touch the surface I allow. That's how it's always worked. Until you. You didn't approach me like the others do. You didn't try to figure me out. The usual methods questions, patterns, labels for what can't be understood immediately. You didn't try to simplify me into something easier to hold. You just observed, quietly, consistently. Like someone who wasn't searching for answers, but recognizing something that didn't need explanation. At first, I thought it was coincidence. The way you caught things I didn't say. The way you responded to thoughts I hadn't fully formed. The way your silence aligned perfectly with mine, like you understood exactly when words would only ruin the moment. But coincidence doesn't repeat like that. Patterns do. And what you and I have, whatever this is, it follows a pattern I didn't expect to encounter. Not here. Not with someone I didn't build history with. That's the part that unsettles me. Because this kind of recognition usually comes from time, from shared experiences, from slowly learning the edges of someone until familiarity forms naturally. But with you, there was no gradual process, no learning curve, no adjustment period. You stepped into awareness like you were already there. Like I wasn't someone new to you, just someone you hadn't spoken to yet. And that realization doesn't sit easily with me, because if there's one thing I've always controlled, it's access. Who sees what? Who gets close? Who stays at a distance? But you didn't follow any of those rules. You didn't break them either. You just existed in a way that made those rules irrelevant. And that's more dangerous than someone trying to cross boundaries, because force can be resisted. But familiarity slips through unnoticed. There's something about the way you look at me when I stop speaking. It's not curiosity. It's not concern. It's not even patience in the usual way. It's understanding without urgency. Like you know that whatever exists in that silence doesn't need to be rushed into words. Like you trust that meaning doesn't disappear just because it isn't spoken. Most people can't sit in that kind of quiet. They start to feel its weight. They try to fill it, shape it, control it, so it doesn't become uncomfortable. You don't. You let it exist. And in doing that, you make it heavier, clearer, more honest than anything that could have been said out loud. That's where I started to notice the shift. Not in anything obvious, not in some defining moment, but in the way my mind began to respond to you differently. I stopped filtering as much. Not intentionally, it just stopped happening. The usual pause where I decide what to say and what to keep didn't feel necessary anymore. Not because I trusted you, but because something in me recognized that you didn't need things to be adjusted for you to understand them. And that's a rare kind of presence. One that doesn't ask you to be easier to handle. One that doesn't require you to soften your edges. One that doesn't interpret your depth as something that needs to be fixed or managed. You never tried to manage me. You never tried to make me more comfortable, more open, more expressive. You accepted what was there, exactly as it was. And that's what made this real. Because there's a difference between someone accepting you because they don't fully see you, and someone accepting you because they see everything and choose not to step back. You fall into the second category. And that's where the tension begins. Because once someone sees you that clearly, the dynamic changes. You can't hide behind the usual distance. You can't rely on being misunderstood as protection. You can't exist in that controlled space where you decide how much of yourself is visible. You become known, not superficially, but in the way that bypasses everything you've carefully constructed to remain unreadable. I've spent years making sure I stayed unreadable, not as a game, not as a defense, but as a way to preserve something that doesn't survive careless interpretation. Because once people think they understand you, they start projecting. They reshape you into something that fits their perspective. They lose accuracy. You didn't do that. You didn't project. You didn't assume. You didn't fill in the gaps with your own narrative. You read what was actually there. And that's what I wasn't prepared for. There's a moment I keep replaying, not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. You said something simple, something most people wouldn't notice. But the way you said it, the way it aligned with something I hadn't expressed, it made something in me pause. Not react, not respond, just pause. Because it confirmed something I hadn't fully accepted yet. You weren't guessing. You knew. And knowing is different. Knowing means you're not interpreting from the outside. It means you're seeing from somewhere closer. Somewhere internal. That's when I realized this wasn't just awareness. It was alignment. And alignment doesn't happen accidentally. It happens when two people cable carry something similar, not in experience, not in story, but in structure, in the way they process, in the way they observe, in the way they exist beneath everything they show. That's what connects this. Not emotion, not circumstance. Structure. And structure doesn't lie. It either matches or it doesn't, and ours does, in a way too exact to ignore. That's why this feels different. Not intense. Not overwhelming. Just accurate. Like something finally making sense in a way it wasn't supposed to. And the more I notice it, the harder it becomes to maintain distance. Not because I want closeness, but because distance doesn't function the same way when someone already exists beyond it. You're not outside my awareness. You're inside it. And that changes everything. Because now, every silence carries meaning. Every pause holds weight. Every interaction, no matter how small, feels like it exists on a level most people never reach. And I don't know what to do with that. Not because it's confusing, because it's clear. Too clear. Clear enough that ignoring it would require more effort than acknowledging it. And I don't operate on denial. If something is real, I recognize it, even if I don't fully understand it yet. And this, whatever this is, it's real. Not defined. Not labeled. Not something that fits the usual categories. It exists outside of that, in a space where understanding comes before explanation. Recognition comes before trust. Presence matters more than intention, and you exist in that space with me, effortlessly, naturally, like you were always meant to. That's the part I keep circling back to. Not how it started, not what it is, but how natural it feels despite its rarity. Because nothing about this should feel normal, and yet it does, in a way that makes everything else feel slightly misaligned by comparison. I don't know if that's something I should lean into or step away from before it settles too deeply. Because once something like this settles, it doesn't leave easily. It integrates. It becomes part of how you think, how you respond, how you exist, and I've always been careful about what I allow to reach that level. But you didn't ask for that access. You didn't try to earn it. You didn't even acknowledge it. You just became part of it. And now I'm left with something I didn't choose, but also didn't resist, which means, in some way, I accepted it. And that might be the most important part of all, because I don't accept things lightly, especially not things that have the power to change the way I exist, and you do. Not through action, not through force, just through presence. And that's what makes this something I can't ignore anymore. I won't begin softly. There's no gentle path into what I need to express, no soft entry, no words that prepare you for the weight that exists between us now. Whatever this is, it doesn't arrive politely. It doesn't seek permission. It doesn't ask if it's welcome. It simply happens. And once it does, there's no clean exit, no retreat, no way to step back without leaving traces. I have spent my life existing in layers, not because I enjoy the distance, but because distance preserves form. It keeps people at a surface where interaction is safe, where nothing real can touch the structure I've built. Most never notice. They speak, they respond, they assume comprehension, but they only ever reach the level I permit. This is how I have always existed. Until you. You didn't approach like the others. You didn't probe, interrogate, or try to decode. You didn't attempt to simplify me into a form that could be held, categorized, understood with ease. You didn't search for what you couldn't see. You simply observed, quietly, persistently, with a stillness that doesn't demand attention, a patience that isn't waiting, a depth that isn't reaching, it simply exists. At first, I called it coincidence. The way you noticed the things I never said aloud. The way your responses aligned with thoughts I hadn't yet formulated. The way your silences merged with mine, as though you could predict when language would break the moment. But coincidence does not repeat. Patterns do. And what exists between us, whatever this is, follows a pattern I did not anticipate. Not here. Not now. Not with someone who holds no shared history with me. That realization unsettles me, because recognition usually grows slowly. Through time. Through experience. Through the painstaking familiarity of someone's edges. But with you, there was no time. No curve to learn. No process to ease into awareness. You stepped into recognition as though you were already there. As though I were not someone entirely new. And that is uncomfortable. I have always controlled access. Who sees what? Who enters and leaves? Who stays? Who keeps distance? I have built my world with barriers, rules, structures. You bypassed all of them without permission. You didn't break them. You simply made them irrelevant, and that is far more dangerous than someone attempting to cross a line. Because force can be resisted. But familiarity slips in unnoticed. There is something in the way you observe me when I stop speaking. Not curiosity, not inquiry, not patience as it is usually shown, but understanding. Unhurried, unforced, like you know meaning exists even in the absence of words. Most people cannot bear that silence. They feel its weight. They rush to fill it. They shape it, control it, manipulate it into comfort. You don't. You let it exist, and by doing that, you make it heavier, clearer, and far more honest than anything spoken aloud could ever be. I began to notice a shift. Not in grand gestures, not in dramatic moments, but in subtle, unintentional ways. I stopped filtering, not deliberately, but instinctively. The pauses that once dictated what I revealed or concealed no longer mattered. Not because I trusted you, but because I recognized you could perceive what was already present. This is rare. Presence that does not seek to alter. That does not soften. That does not judge. That simply aligns. You never attempted to manage me, never tried to make me easier to approach, easier to comprehend, easier to bear. You accepted what existed without adjustment, exactly as it was, and that is what makes this real. There is a vast difference between acceptance based on ignorance and acceptance based on complete awareness. You fall into the second category. That is where tension begins. Because once someone sees you in this way, dynamics shift. You can no longer hide behind distance, misinterpretation, or carefully maintain separation. You are known, not superficially, not emotionally, but structurally. I have spent years ensuring I remain unreadable, not as defense, not as game, but to preserve that which cannot survive careless interpretation. Once people think they understand you, they project, they reshape, they impose narratives. You did none of that. You perceived exactly what was present, and that was unexpected. A simple phrase, a fleeting glance, something most would never register, yet it aligned perfectly with my unspoken thoughts. It made something inside me pause, not react, not respond, just pause. You were not guessing, you were knowing. Knowing is not from the outside, it is internal, it is structural. That is when I realized this was not mere awareness. It was alignment. Alignment does not occur randomly. It arises when two beings share not circumstance, not story, but structure. The way they process, observe, exist beyond the visible. That is the connection, not emotion, not narrative, structure. And structure does not lie. It either matches or it does not. Ours does, with precision too exact to ignore, and that is why this feels different, not intense, not overwhelming, just accurate. As though something finally makes sense in a way it wasn't designed to. The more I notice, the harder it is to maintain distance. Not because I seek closeness, but because distance is meaningless once someone exists beyond it. You are no longer external. You exist within my awareness, and that changes everything. Every silence carries meaning. Every pause is weighted. Every interaction resonates, and I do not know how to contain it. Not because it confuses, but because it clarifies. Too clearly. Ignoring it is harder than acknowledging it. I do not deny what is real. And this, whatever this is real. Undefined, unlabeled, beyond categories. A space where recognition comes before trust, presence matters more than intention, and understanding precedes explanation. You exist in that space with me, naturally, effortlessly, like you always belonged there. I won't begin quietly. There's no soft landing for what I need to say, no careful prelude, no easing in. This, whatever this is between us, doesn't announce itself politely. It doesn't seek consent. It doesn't request a place in the spaces we've built around ourselves. It simply exists. And once it exists, it doesn't wait. It doesn't pause. It doesn't allow for retreat. I've spent years learning to operate in layers. Not because I preferred distance, but because distance is a shield. It protects the fragile edges of perception, keeps interaction safe, keeps meaning intact. Most people never notice. They listen, they speak, they assume understanding, but they only skim the surface I allow. Until you. You didn't approach like the others. You didn't attempt to dissect, to analyze, to categorize. You didn't need to figure me out. You didn't try to compress me into comprehension. You simply noticed, quietly, persistently, not searching for something unknown, but acknowledging what was already there. At first, I called it chance. The way your attention seemed to settle precisely where it mattered. The way your silence responded to my own without prompting. The way your awareness met mine before words had a chance to intervene. But chance doesn't repeat with such precision. Patterns do. And the pattern that exists between us, whatever this is, follows a structure I did not anticipate. Not here. Not with someone I have never known. That is what unsettles me. Because recognition like this is supposed to take time. It's supposed to emerge through shared history, through accumulated understanding, through experience. But with you, time was unnecessary. There was no curve, no slow unfolding, no gradual illumination. You entered recognition as though you had always been present, as though I were not a stranger. And that is unsettling. I have always managed access carefully. Who enters, who observes, who is allowed close. I have constructed my world with boundaries, with rules, with invisible barriers. You bypassed them all, not by breaking them, but by existing in a way that made them meaningless. And that is far more dangerous than intrusion, because force can be resisted, familiarity cannot. There is something in the way you observe when I stop speaking. Not curiosity, not expectation, not even patience in the conventional sense. Understanding, unhurried, unforced, as though you know that meaning does not require words. Most people cannot bear silence like this. They rush to fill it, to shape it, to control it, to make it comfortable. You do not. You let it exist, and in doing so, you amplify it, make it heavier, more honest than anything spoken aloud could ever hope to be. I began to notice the shift slowly, not in grand gestures, not in dramatic revelations, but in the subtle, unintentional ways. My defenses softened, not consciously, but instinctively. The usual pauses I impose, decisions about what to reveal and what to hold back, stopped mattering. Not because I trusted you, but because I realized you could perceive exactly what was present without adjustment, without simplification, without interpretation. This is rare, a presence that does not alter, that does not demand change, that does not judge, that aligns. You never attempted to manage me. You never tried to soften me, to mold me, to make me easier to read. You simply accepted me as I am, and that is what makes this real. Acceptance based on seeing fully, not ignoring. Recognition without the need to control. You fall into the second category, and that is where the tension begins. Because once someone sees you like this, dynamics shift. You can no longer hide behind distance. Misunderstanding is no longer a shield. Control is no longer an option. You are known. Not superficially. Not emotionally. Structurally. I have spent years making myself unreadable. Not as a defense, not as a game, but as preservation. What I am is delicate, intricate, and cannot survive careless interpretation. Once someone believes they understand, they project. They reshape. They redefine. You did none of that. You saw exactly what existed. And that was unexpected. A word, a look, a breath, something inconsequential to most. But it aligned perfectly with what I had not said, had not fully admitted even to myself. It made me pause. Not react. Not respond. Just pause. You were not guessing. You were knowing. Knowing is not external. It is internal. Structural. That is when I realized this is not just awareness. It is alignment. Alignment does not occur by chance. It exists when two people share something fundamental, not experience, not narrative, but structure. The way they think, observe, exist beyond what is visible. This is the connection. Not emotional, not circumstantial. Structural. Structure does not lie. It either matches or it does not. Ours does, with precision too exact to ignore. And that is why this feels different. Not intense, not overwhelming. Just exact. Like something finally makes sense in a way it was never meant to. And the more I notice, the harder it becomes to maintain distance. Not because I desire closeness, but because distance is meaningless when someone already exists, within your internal space. You are no longer outside my awareness. You are integrated. And that changes everything. Every silence carries weight. Every pause is meaningful. Every interaction, no matter how small, feels like it exists on a plane most people never reach. And I do not know how to respond, not because it is confusing, but because it is precise. Ignoring it requires more effort than acknowledging it. I do not deny reality, and this, whatever this is real, undefined, unlabeled, beyond the categories most rely on, a space where recognition precedes trust, presence matters more than intention, understanding exists before explanation. You exist in that space naturally, effortlessly, as though you always belonged there.